Welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. I'm your host, Sherry Ward. I have a passion to bring hope and breakthrough to those experiencing the toughest times of their lives. In this podcast, we will give you critical insights and revelations as I interview people just like you, those who have been right where you are and understand exactly what a wilderness season is all about. It's real, it's raw, it's practical. Come join the conversation. Welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. I'm your host, Sherry Ward, and with me today is Jenny Rae. I'm so excited for you to be here. And your bio is absolutely huge, but I'll just read a few things about Jenny Rae. She's running for governor to free the California so that Californians can live, work, and breathe again. She's a leader who shapes culture. Love that. Jenny Rae has a BA in economics from the University of Virginia and an MBA from the Ivy League's Columbia Business School. After launching her career advising multi-billion-dollar companies and government agencies at Bain, she worked on the founding teams of two California-based tech startups in energy and finance. She then bought Management Consultant, a company that helps people get jobs. She's a frequent presenter at Harvard Business School and the Wharton School of Business and over 60 other top institutions, as well as contributed to Forbes, Business Insider, and other business publications. Okay, what haven't you done? Because you're also a mother.
I've never run an Ironman.
Okay. And a farmer, like you tried your hand at farming in a ranch. So,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, what have you not done?
Yeah. The biggest danger for me is going on vacation. You never know what I might come back with, a new business idea or some kind of new enterprise.
I understand. I mean, one of the top jokes in my family is like the grass doesn't go green long underneath your feet. It's like,
That's
yeah,
exactly
you
right.
got the new thing going. So I'm so excited to have you on the show. And I know that we're talking about the wilderness season.
Mhm.
So what we're going to be talking about today to kick it off with is what does it look like for a nation and even a state that is in a wilderness season?
Yeah. Well, I want to just open by saying that I am an amateur historian, and I also love data. So, as I've gone through the very deep policy planning for the state of California, I've looked at history to figure out where we went wrong on some of the issues that are really facing the state right now. And I looked at the data to measure the size of the problems because I did not want to be influenced by narrative alone. I didn't want to believe what everyone was talking about were the real issues. And so some of the issues that I believe are the issues of our state are not the most common talking points. And I'll give you a hint on that. Taxes I have as one part of what I talk about, but they're not the number one issue in California. They're not why people leave. They're not the biggest problem. And so I really wanted to get to the root causes of why we have an exodus from the state of California, how long it's been going on. And I'll give you a hint. It's just about 40 years. And what we do to break it. And how to move forward. And so, what I can do is walk you through a little bit of my process and then share what I've come to in terms of conclusions.
That would be
and you can
great.
interject as you want
Yeah,
to.
that
Okay,
would be great.
Well, I really began this journey to think about running for office last year during COVID. Some people that I really admire are public servants. I have a cousin who is a congresswoman from Virginia. I have people from my business school who serve actually in international capacities and public service. And so I really have looked at them and said, isn't it great that somebody wants to serve in government? But it was 100% never my focus, my issue. I love business. I've loved business. I felt called into business. And God gave me a revelation about business. He said, business is the primary way I reveal my creativity on the earth.
I love that.
For the last 20 years,
Yeah.
I've been focused on the business world. So this whole idea about the importance of government in bringing an entire community, which in my case, the position I'm running for is a statewide community out of a wilderness season and into another season began to captivate me when I started to look at how we were managing through COVID last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love to pray. I'm a woman of faith and I'm also a woman of data, right? So I love the truth and I love faith. I think the both of them go together quite well. And so I wanted to actually understand the data of how we were managing through COVID. And that's another story for another day. That's not the purpose of this conversation. But what I discovered is that the way we were measuring success for COVID was, I believe, incorrect in California. And recognizing that made me wonder, I wonder if we're measuring success in other areas of management of the state.
That's
And
good.
so what I thought about was, going and figuring out with our budget, with some of the different kind of key core social, environmental, and business issues in our state, what we have in terms of measurements. And I came to two high level conclusions. Number one, we don't manage using numbers effectively. We don't measure correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And second, we don't care deeply about root cause issues and take ownership over those. And some of that is because we have a legislature that's 120 people. If one person takes ownership over it, it doesn't really make a difference at the state level, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so this is, I think, why I ultimately felt led by God, came to the conclusion that running for the position of governor was so important, because we need someone vitally to be able to identify how you measure things correctly and whether or not policy is going to be good or bad policy. And then therefore what we should prioritize in the legislature and what we should be signing into law and what we should be putting into the budget of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So once I came to that conclusion, we're measuring things incorrectly or not measuring them at all. Then I started to think, well, what would make a difference in California? And so through both prayer and a tremendous amount of research, I came up with three things. I think that California has been in a wilderness season because people in the last 10 years have begun to lose hope in building a life here. They feel that the education system does no longer support a vision for the future. It's a hopeless place. Instead
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
the
I would agree with
workforce
that.
of the future, right? We don't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
a matchup between what happens in our schools and this vital momentum from schools into a diverse, equipped, prepared workforce of the
And I
future.
want to interject here because I
Yeah.
completely agree with that. I was 25 years in the school system and I worked in the inner cities of Los Angeles. So I
Okay.
saw firsthand what was happening there and it was tough. It was
Yeah.
really tough. We had to stay in the classroom. There were so many lockdowns. There was so much going on. And even the curriculum that's being taught, there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that needs to happen in education.
And no one in the last, as far as I can tell, 20 years at least, has taken a step back and said, in 20 years, what do we want our kids to be learning? Right. And, ironically, Gavin Newsom is the only one in the last 20 years that's been in office with school age children, and his kids are in private school. So he has no incentive to drive the kind of change that his kids would need to see, because he and his wife are opting into a totally different programmatic choice in the first place. And so, so we're in this, odd moment for education where we've lost a vision for the future.
Mhm.
And I think if you think about the wilderness, the famous wilderness of the nation of Israel, right, as it was
Yeah.
wandering in the desert for the 40 years, what happened? Well, right, Joshua and Caleb spied out the promised land. They were two of the 12 spies, and the only two that said, "We can take it. There
Yeah.
are giants in the
Yeah.
land, but we can do this." The people of Israel said, "No, we don't think we can," and then they wandered hopelessly, really, without a purpose, for the next, almost 40 years. And so their total 40-year season in the desert was, I think, characterized by a sense of impossibility and hopelessness.
Mhm.
California was not founded on those principles. That's not how we built Silicon Valley. We built them based on the exact opposite revelation. corporations. Hollywood, right? You can create a magic kingdom. You can build the computer of the future. Like that's
Yeah,
actually in the innovative core and the nature of who we are in California. But
yeah, yeah.
um, but over the last 40 years, I think that our hopefulness and that spirit of innovation have become cluttered by a
Mhm.
sense of government overregulation and a lack of vision.
Wow.
And so anyhow, education was one of those things. Did you have anything else you wanted to say before I jump into what I think
No,
some of the
just
specific things?
education's a real hot button for me because,
Yeah,
a lot of I've got now college age kids that
yeah.
are even considering, "Do I even go to college? Is it worth it?"
Mhm.
Like, because a lot of the stuff is so outdated, you
I
know?
know. Well, and I mean, I doubled down on college, right? I went to undergrad
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
got
you
an
went to all the
MBA.
yeah.
I got a lot of college,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so,
yeah.
they might not be wrong, and it's such a it depends at the moment. And wouldn't it be amazing for more kids to graduate from high school certain that they don't need college, or certain that they at least can take the first step or two in their career without college, and then
Mhm.
maybe make a choice if it makes sense to go to college at another time. Yeah, it's an unusual place to be in. But when I think about my boys, my son, I mean, he just created this kind of amazing switch box for trains in our house. He designed it, he built it, it works. I
Wow.
was shocked. He's 9 years old, and he's never had training in anything like this, right? What does
Yeah,
it
yeah.
look like to unleash that in our youth and our kids? What does it mean to give a kid that normally would be playing video games responsibility to code the video game of the future, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What does it look like to engage them in creation, not just participation? Because that's really, I think, again, going back to my revelation about business, right? If business is the primary way that God reveals his creativity on the earth, we have to unleash creativity in our kids through
Yeah, and a
education.
lot of the
Well,
vocational education pieces of it, because I was part of Perkins for a long time, and that's just all gone to the side,
totally.
it's like not all of them are built for the way that the system's built, and
I
some
mean,
of
we've
them
got
are
to make
very
plumbing sexy again. We do.
yeah, and
We
some of
need
us
plumbers, and we
yeah,
need
yeah,
millionaire plumbers to be
yeah,
sharing about how you build a plumbing business and have a big house and a pool. Like we need it not to be the kind of thing that everybody's like, shh, somebody went to vocational school,
yeah, yeah,
as if
yeah,
it's like a
yeah,
halfway house for high
yeah.
schoolers, right?
I
It
like
needs to be
that,
like,
that's
yeah,
good.
look at those kids. They're going to make $1 million before anybody else will in their classroom. Isn't that
You know,
awesome?
the
Right?
the automotive industry, they make really good money, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different
Yeah.
fields that are for the kids that are more kinesthetic that, wanna touch, feel, build, we need more opportunities for them.
Totally. Well, I think the other things that I looked at under live were housing and public safety. And again, one of the challenges, and I'll take the full blame for this on behalf of my generation. I'm 41 years old. And what the narrative is in my generation is don't go into government. Right? If you're any good, stay in the private sector, be a lawyer, be a teacher or something else, but do not go into government because you will be blitzed by the media. You will be hated from all sides. You will never be able to satisfy anyone, and you will be undervalued and undercompensated. Right? That's the message. And
Right.
here's the problem with that: it's not a career. Public service is not a career.
Yeah, that's true.
It's an act. It's a season, and so we should view this differently versus the kinds of the ways that it's viewed right now. And so there is an entire gap in my generation of people who have said, yeah, I'll take 5 years or 8 years or 4 years and I'll serve in public. And then I'll hand over my playbook to
Mhm.
someone else to get that out to another place. But anyhow, housing is an issue in California. We grew housing by 6%. We grew people by 6% and housing by 2% in the last decade. And by nature, just basic economics, what that means is that there's fewer houses for more people, so prices go up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so what do we need? Well, we need to, we have two options. We can try to run people off, which is what's happening right now. And the whole state is creeping and suffering. Or we can not run people off and we can compete for the most valuable resource we have, which is our people, by providing a place that they want to live and the housing that they want to live in. Homelessness is another great example. Right now, in almost every city in California, there is no census or registry of the homeless. We do not have their names, ages, and whether they're veterans or non-veterans written down anywhere. And so we say we have an increasing homeless problem, but it's anecdotal. We don't even have the numbers to support that.
Yeah.
We say we
Yeah.
spend more money on homelessness, but we have no idea what it goes to or what the accomplishments are or what we're trying to solve. And so, again, a better data approach, a very clear focus, and a commitment to the root cause issues. Most people, if you give them a house, that doesn't make them non-homeless, right? The issue is not the house or them sleeping in a park versus them sleeping in a house. The issue is that they are often substance abusers or mentally ill or both, and we need services to provide for that. And right now our services for that are at capacity in the state, so we can't applaud our leaders for spending money on something if they're not actually solving the root cause issues.
That's good. That's
And
good.
then public safety is another one. We had overcrowded prisons 7 years ago. We passed a law called the Prop 47, which was named the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. It was a decriminalization law that took petty larceny from $400 up to $950. And it basically said now it's a ticket instead of jail. And
Hmm.
the problem is that we made it a per day thing. And so now we've actually incentivized criminals to steal up to $950. In fact, in some Walmarts, there are videos of them walking around with a calculator,
Oh my gosh.
walking straight out the door past a security guard. And so here's the issue, right? We saw the problem as overcrowding in jails and prisons. And we said, here's one way to fix it: make the sentences more lenient. Well, what did we do? We incentivized more crime without actually solving the root cause issue, right?
Hmm.
And so what's the root cause issue? Well, we have too many people entering a criminal lifestyle in California. What's the root cause issue for that? The average age for literacy of our criminals is third grade.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen
Right.
that
So
firsthand. Yeah.
going back to
Yeah.
education. And
Yeah.
so what happened before that? Well, we loosened the standards to pass a kid on through grades.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so instead of having additional services, we just said, look, we don't want a 15-year-old in the fifth grade. And so they got older, they're gonna go forward. And we don't actually teach and successfully train kids for the workforce. So again, right, we have to kind of think of it as a bigger picture issue, but we can't just solve the issue of today with new rules without creating problems for tomorrow. And so we have to really think twice about the way we handle criminal justice in California as
Those are
well.
good. Those are good topics and platforms to run on. So thank you for sharing those.
Yeah,
I'd like to dig in. I know I heard one of your interviews that you did. You talked about giving God your yes,
yeah,
which I know that the biggest thing that we talk about the wilderness season is not because you got into trouble or trials because of decisions, but it's because of your yes that you gave to God.
yeah,
So, what are some of your yeses that you needed to give to God before you even ran for office?
yeah. Well, most of them involved things not looking the way that you could win approval of the world. It's basically a yes to God and a no to human approval. So I would say that one of the big ones was for me leaving my corporate job, which was a really, I stayed at the Ritz-Carlton. I had a driver. His name was Nico. He picked me up in a town car and took me wherever I needed to go, right? I lived the high flying lifestyle. I flew first class everywhere. And leaving that job and the certainty of success, in that job to kind of follow the still small voice was for me one of those big risks that I took that led to a season of business building instead of business success, immediate business success. And it ended up with business success, but it was really character training, right? Is what I said
Yeah.
yes to,
Yeah.
in a hidden place with no evident fruit. And so when you have parents, well-meaning parents who said, hey, you're really smart and you graduated at the top of your class in college and you should have something to show for it today, and to not be able to do that because you're following God into the hidden place, I think that for me was one of my yeses. Another one for me was moving to Redding. I moved to Redding, California, away from a large city where my prospects were sure, and it was easy
Yeah.
to see the
Yeah.
diverse pathways. I moved here instead of getting an MBA, which was my alternate choice. Again, another kind of sure pathway to success. And God actually spoke to me and said, if you get an MBA now, it will be because I am your plan B. And so
Oh,
my
that's
yes to
hard.
God
Yeah.
has been making him my only plan, a plan A. And
Yeah.
coming to Reading was like a very physical manifestation of that. I moved from a city of 4 million people to a city of, 100,000, a county of 200,000.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I moved from lots of job opportunities to relatively few job opportunities. I mean, it was something where God really had to place his hand directly on something to prosper myself and my family here. And it was a tuning time, I think, for
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I was in a business that I didn't agree with the owner's direction on. And I planned to quit the business. I mean, that's the same thing to do. This was in 2011. And when I went, the morning of my interview, when I went
Yeah.
to quit this business, the Lord said to me, buy the business from him.
Oh, wow.
And so I
Wow.
walked into my quitting interview and surprised him and a little bit myself and said, I can see that you've lost vision for this. Let me buy it from you. And,
Wow.
I had worked on multi-billion-dollar transactions for business purchases, but not this kind of private business purchase. And I didn't have millions of dollars to offer the guy. It just came out of my mouth and we began to work it into being. And so we closed that transaction 9 months later. I bought the business and have been growing it ever since.
Wow. Wow.
But there was a ton of risk that I took on, financial risk and practical risk, by investing myself in business growth. And when you do that instead of doing the other things that you could be doing, there was risk in that. So I feel like I could probably go back through my life and say I took a risk by saying yes to God so many times.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those are just a couple of them that really led me into a season of hiddenness for each one. And each one, I believe, was a season of character growth, that God was investing for me in the kind of character that I would need now to sustain the drawing and quartering of the public square. That,
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who say, I don't like what you said about that. I don't like what you said about this. F you to this, F you to that. Not always the same
Right.
thing either.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
And,
Right.
and if you're swayed by popular opinion, you could really fall apart quickly in this space. And, there are some things that I think we need so desperately from our leaders right now. One is truth. And another one is courage. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
those are some of the things that God has been building in me in those wilderness seasons prior to inviting me slash mandating for me. I mean, I really feel like this is kind of God said to Joshua, you will cross the Jordan River. It wasn't a like, if you're willing, you'll cross
Yeah.
the Jordan River, right? It would have been disobedient for me not to run, for God to
And then
bring
he
help.
said, "Be strong and courageous."
Yeah, he
So
did.
that's exactly what you need.
Yeah. All the time.
All the
All,
time,
all
all the
days.
time in the
Yes.
sun. So
Yeah.
what was your journey into the yes into running? What was
Mhm.
the event right before that?
Yeah. Well, on the 1st of March in 2020, God said, I want you to follow everything that Gavin Newsom is doing and think about what you'd do if you were in his place. And for those of you that are listening that aren't in California, Gavin Newsom is the current governor of California. And I thought, that's kind of weird. Why would I follow him? Because my general view was that God did not like politics, right? God hated
Mhm.
politics. And you know what I actually thought was that God hated government and
Mhm.
politics. And he corrected me in March of last year. And he said, I love government, but hate politics.
Interesting.
And it was all of a sudden this kind of clarity for me of recognizing we were in a presidential election cycle, which became really, idolatry for a lot of people, and we were in an urgent moment in our nation's history with COVID and the management of COVID and trying to figure out really our identity. Are we a free people or are we a managed people or not? We're
Mhm.
not totally sure. Can we be free and still make wise choices on behalf of other people? I'm not totally sure. So, we had an identity moment, I think, in 2020.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so as I was watching that, I was paying attention to what was happening in the spirit realm. There was a lot of fear, of course, released in the spirit realm on all accounts. And I became convinced that what God loves is righteousness and justice, but what He hates is fear and control. And
Yeah.
and so I wrestled through that through the majority of 2020, and I began to pray that God would both bring righteousness and justice in our current leaders, and that He would raise up a new generation of leaders for government. Because once I understood that He loved it, it was like the calling into business. I recognized that God loved business, manifested Himself creatively through business, and so
Mhm.
all of a sudden I couldn't do anything except for love business. And I felt that same draw toward government, but not for myself. I was like, I wonder how I'll fund people. I wonder how I'll support them. You know,
I'll help them
how
and
how I
support
can
them.
basically stay as far away, with my arm
Yeah, and
as I
support
can.
them through it, yeah.
Yeah, totally. From this hot mess that is government, and really, what started to happen is that God started to beckon me with a vision for the state. And it started with weird things. He said, "Buy a pair of diamond earrings." I'm actually wearing them today.
Aw.
He said, "Get a new business wardrobe." And I was like, "Wait, we're all wearing sweatpants. Why would I get a business wardrobe?"
Yeah.
My family and I went on vacation, and he said, "There's coming a time soon that you won't leave the state of California." I thought, "Oh no, this is going to get bad. We're going to close our borders."
Oh,
I,
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
wasn't getting what he
Yeah,
was leading toward, right?
yeah.
But then you asked about the moment that I felt like it was going to be governor someday. I had no idea it was going to be this fast. Was in September last year. Got invited, my family and I, on our way down to Yosemite, to stay in the closest hotel to Gavin Newsom's house. And I looked at the closest hotels to the governor's mansion in downtown Sacramento, and they were awful. They were all these like kind of quarantine sites with no services, just a
Wow.
room. Well, we had just come back from a vacation where we had had a pool outside, takeout restaurants, and had a really good time. And so I thought there must be somewhere in the greater Sacramento area that has this. So I promptly disobeyed what God had said, and I booked a hotel 20 miles east of
Oh,
the city of Sacramento.
okay.
Well, that night as we're checking into the hotel, I felt God's conviction. Like, hey, I asked you to book the closest hotel to Gavin Newsom's house, to the governor's house. And so I looked up, something about Gavin Newsom's house. And what popped up that time is that he doesn't live in the governor's mansion. He lives in a private home 20 miles east of the city. And
Oh,
our hotel
wow.
was the closest hotel to his house. And God said to me, "See, I will not make you choose between obedience and your family."
Oh, that's good. That's
And I
good.
thought,
That's really
I
good.
thought that is good, but also, what are you talking about, right?
I
I
have no
mean,
idea.
now it makes sense because I'm running
Yeah,
for office and I don't want to
yeah,
lose my family and I love my family and it matters to me that I'm doing this, based on what God said. But
yeah.
but also, what in the world was he saying? And so the next day we went and we prayed in front of the two houses. We prayed in front of Gavin Newsom's house. We prayed for him as I do for our leaders. I prayed for wisdom and for righteousness and for justice, right? But we also went down to the governor's mansion downtown that's empty. And I stood outside the gate and God said, "How would you use this house?"
Wow.
And I said, "I don't like where this is going," right? Because you
It's
don't just
like,
like
do I
use
answer?
the
Do I
governors.
not
I
answer?
know, I
It's like
know. And let me tell you, there was no grand thought in me that I could become governor of California. There was only a sense of kind of like impossibility, basically. But he asked the question. And so I found it in my life a good practice to answer the Lord's questions when he
yeah,
asks
yeah,
me
yeah.
the questions.
Just a little bit, yeah.
And so I stood outside that gate and I just said, "Okay, God, this is what I want to do. I would want to be a place of reconciliation. I would want to
Mm,
bring people together in a home that would not meet in an office. and I would like for it to cross divides in our state. And I
That's good.
started to say, I would like to bring Black Lives Matter and sheriffs together for a dinner. I would like to have teenage moms and billionaire women. I just began to dream about these divided places, right? The rich and the poor,
Hmm. Hmm.
the law enforcement, and our people of color, different languages in the state, right? Our First Nations people and our farmers, right? How could we bring the groups that seem to never be able to figure out how to come together for solutions together at a dinner table? And as I was walking away, the Lord said, "Those are good ideas." And I thought, "Oh, no." So,
Yeah, it's like, oh no.
I know. So I got in the car and I said, "Honey, I have really bad news. Um, I think the Lord's speaking to me about maybe eventually in 10 or 20 years running for office, maybe
That's
even for
funny.
governor."
That's funny.
And it was that cracking point that I felt like, I felt that the invitation to that kind of role would be a battle, and I felt naturally nervous.
Yeah.
Right? Because,
Yeah, for
and just
sure.
to put this in context, my husband and I have taken a couple of these risks with the Lord. We live on a farm that God brought us to, and I had a dream about 5 years before we ever saw it. We have a business that God said, buy the business from him. The business is prospering and successful. We live in a city where we're not supposed to make the money that we make and live the life that we live. And sure enough, we have a thriving spiritual life as well as this, amazing practical life. And we can
Mm.
truly look at our life and say, God has done this. God has done this. When I went to business school and everybody said, how do you get the returns for real estate that you get? I said, you know, I just asked God what we're supposed to do, and He said, buy houses, and so I did. And they were like, well, is there some kind of investment strategy with this? I was like, I don't know if it'll work the same, but you can ask him to. So I
That's
feel
funny.
I feel like, what we ultimately had to acknowledge, Sherry, to walk into this, is that what it requires to
Mhm.
become the governor of California, what I had a conversation with the Lord about on the 28th of February, exactly 1 year from when He first said, I want you to follow Gavin Newsom and think about what you'd do if you were in his place. What actually transpired is that I became willing to give back to God everything that He has given to us. And I said, if this is your purpose, if this is where you are going,
Mhm.
I will
Mhm.
go with you because I
Yeah.
gave you my yes
My yes.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I could feel both the temptation to stay where He brought us
Mhm.
and the conviction, that if I did, I was choosing between my own comfort and a history of faith as opposed to a living and an active faith. And so that was the decision. That was the trade that I made when I said yes to running for office. I said, God, if it will require and cost us everything, you have already told us we will not lose our family, but everything else is on the table.
That's
And
tough. That's really tough.
and you know what happened? The courage that I have needed to do this was imparted to me
Oh,
when
that's
I
good.
stopped protecting myself.
That's good too. That's really good. So
And I didn't know that that
unpack
was the holy exchange that would
so
happen.
unpack that a little bit because that's really a profound statement. So unpack
Yeah.
that last statement a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, what God promises us that He will never leave us or forsake us, but He also guides us into, God is like a master chess player. He's working His
Yes. Yeah.
purposes together on the earth. And so
Absolutely.
in much of my life, the Lord has led me through peace, through joy, and right, that kind of peace that passes all understanding. That's how God, I've known that God was resting on something, even if it didn't make sense or I couldn't explain it or I didn't have immediate fruit to show from it. But this transaction was a fear of the Lord transaction. This
Mm.
transaction was oh, you're 100% worthy and you're worthy of every day of my life.
Mm.
and I will not withhold from you. And so putting everything on to the altar was me saying, if you require everything of me that you have given me up until this point to do this and to move to where you're going, I value you and your voice more than I value the comfort that I have been living in. And
I love that.
and
I
so
love
when I
that.
put it on the altar, I, up until that point, I was having these thoughts like, well, if I run for office and it doesn't work out, I could do this with my business, or I could do this with X, Y, or Z.
Mhm.
And I was recognizing in that conversation, because I cried out to God and I said, if you ask me to do this in 2021, I'm going to get canceled. I'm going to get beaten up. Like,
Yeah.
this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
And God said,
Yeah.
exactly. He said,
Yeah.
you'll lose everything, because that's what it takes to become a public servant. You don't get to take it with you. You don't get to take your self-interest with you if you're truly going to lay your life down to serve.
Wow.
And so when he said that and I handed it over, all of a sudden I didn't have to protect my interest, my business, everything. I didn't have to protect it anymore. And like, it would be something I would mourn if I lost it, truly. And
Yeah. Yeah.
everything is threatened right now, but where I'm going, I don't know if I can take it with me.
Yeah.
So so ultimately, but ultimately not worrying about that anymore and not making every decision to kind of like hedge my bets and play it safe has let me go more aggressively into my
That's good too.
purpose in this season, which I
Yeah.
believe is to win the race to become the governor of California, to break the spirit of fear and to break the spirit of greed over this state, and to do everything with my heart wide open, which means that sometimes I cry when I'm speaking, because I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm trying to be open, right? I'm trying to be open to what God's doing, and I'm trying to be present in what He wants to do in the state. And sometimes that breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to see what's happening. So yeah, it just
For
means
sure.
not protecting myself and not
Right.
going for polish, or protection, but going after His heart and His purpose and putting everything day after day back on the line to do that.
And that's a servant leader. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be about, is laying it down to be a servant for others. And I just thank you and I applaud you for those yeses when nobody was looking, because that has built the character in you to come into this new season that you're in. And it's those yeses that nobody sees that you've laid it down incrementally in the yeses throughout the years to then lay down this and have this yes.
Yeah, it should come with a warning. Like, when you say this
Warning
yes,
label.
yeah, when you say this yes, there's another one that you're getting prepped for that's going to be harder than this one.
I
It's
know
like
what you mean. Yeah, I know.
a
Just when you think you've gotten past that level, it's like a video game. It's like, no, we just leveled up. So,
I mean, Sherry, I love that we're talking about the wilderness season, because God, last year at the beginning of 2020, said, I want you to study Joshua, like not just read it, but study it.
mhm.
And so I was so moved when I was like, look at this. But then I started to read more and more, and I was like, wow, I missed basically the whole book, because my old version of Joshua was, Joshua believed that it could be done. When Moses died, Joshua carried the people, led them into the promised land, took the battle of Jericho, and lived happily ever after. Like, that was
Yeah, yeah.
literally my reading of it, right?
It's a Disney version.
Yeah, totally. It's a Disney version of Joshua. And then you read it and it's like, oh, and he like strung up people, as an example for unrighteousness. Like, he took this city by this way. God told him to do this in this city. And it's a series of battles. Like, what the
Yeah,
guy
yeah,
wins for believing it can be done is a battle, not the promised land. He wins the battle.
yeah,
And that's like really what it means to be in a wilderness season, preparing and then enter into the season where you take the land. It's not, you waltz in. Like, God doesn't
yeah,
prepare you
yeah,
in the wilderness to just like wander through a door. He prepares you to take in the spirit realm by force, the oppressive nature of something that was formerly there, to cast it down and to replace it with something different. And so the training comes for a purpose. But I thought I was retired. I was like, let me buy a boat, right? I have done well in my former battles. And God
Good
was
and
like,
faithful servant,
congratulations.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, running for office, running for governor of California is one of the craziest things because you are running and asking people to give you the greatest battle of your life. You're asking for an inheritance of a battle, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Vote for me and I will battle for you. That's what you are asking for in this time, in this season, in this state. And that's really right after 40 years of wilderness, 40 years of forests being undermanaged, 40 years of water not being, thought of toward the future, 40 years of power not being invested in. Like we have a 40-year vision gap that where we have wandered in a wilderness season in our state, and we you can literally look back 40 years. It's 40 years, 41 years, 42 years, but it's
Wow.
40 years that all of these things have been accumulating, and our state is suffering. People are crying out for for a new way of doing things, and
And I
we
like
can't
that you
take the old way with us.
No, but I'm glad that you have the eyes, of Joshua and Caleb, or like you're seeing it in a different way. You're doing the faith and the data
Yeah,
in a new way, and it's not gonna take you out. You're thinking, "Okay, how can I take the land, and what am I gonna do with the land
yeah,
and the people in it?"
it's
So,
clear. My job is to give it as an inheritance to the people.
that's awesome. I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. So thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. And how can people get a hold of you? How could they donate to your campaign? I know that's always
Yes.
a good thing too.
It's so good. It's so humbling. I mean, my family and I are always the givers. We're the ones that write the checks and send the money, and we still have been doing that throughout our campaign. God's called us to a life of generosity for sure. But it's humbling to be doing something that is bigger than I can do on our own. So we'd love to have you participate. If you're in California, I'd love it if you'd vote. And if you are not in California, but anywhere around the country, you can donate to the campaign. So the email address is hello@jennyrayca.com. Our website is jennyrayca.com. And our Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter handles are all Jenny Rae CA. So JENNYRAECA. And that's where you can find us. We'd love for you to follow along, send us an encouraging message, send us a question. We're an open team with 24-hour responses. And, I could come on another day and talk to you about how God builds teams in a wilderness season, but this team is pretty remarkable. So you guys will get well cared
That's
for.
awesome.
Right.
That's so awesome. Well, we wish you the very best, and thank you so much for being on the show today. Until
It's a
next
gift.
time.
Thank you, Sherry.
Until next time, we'll see you on the Wilderness Season podcast. Hey guys, it's Sherry Ward here with a really quick announcement. I am so excited that my next book, Crossing the Jordan, Navigating Life's Transition and Changes, is coming out soon. It's in the final editing stage. It'll be the second book in the trilogy. So the first one is The Wilderness Season, and then we've got this Crossing Over season. And it is an actual season. Nobody talks about it. It's the tail end of the wilderness and what happens right before you come out of the wilderness and go into your promised land. So stay tuned. We would love to have you on the Zoom call for our book launch coming up soon. All right, until next time, see you later. Thank you for listening to the Wilderness Season podcast. If you need help navigating through your own wilderness season, pick up a copy of my book, A Journey Out of the Wilderness, available on Amazon. Also, continue the conversation online with us by going to our Wilderness Season Facebook page. For resources and events, you can go to www.sherrylynnward.com. If you have enjoyed this show, please subscribe and review our podcast. Just remember, you're not alone.